Americans spend roughly $11 billion every year on self-help programs. They spend $11 billion on DVDs and classes and seminars to learn how to be successful. And they learn these successful habits, they learn these successful strategies and principles. And really the best way to learn to be successful is to find somebody successful, isn't it? The way to learn to be successful is to find someone who's successful and don't recreate the wheel. Do what they're doing. That's one of the better ways. But success can look different to different people. And for some, it's being financially free. To not have to do the math on if you can pay the electric bill to be able to help another family. To not have to do the math that if you're going to hurt your family by helping another family. That's success to some people. For some of you, success might simply just be that you let your teenager live another day. That might be a successful day. So success can look different for different people, but there are also explanations. Some of you really resonated with that one. I noticed that. And we have to talk after because you're really not supposed to kill them. But success has two explanations, and they really boil down to the natural and the supernatural. And this success of some people can't be explained by anything else but just simply the supernatural. And what that means is that the very hand of God seems to be on that person or on that ministry, on that project. And that's why we chose this series of Nehemiah. Because we get to see the supernatural things, but also the natural. We get to see the supernatural explanations that are demonstrated that when God moved the heart of King Artaxerxes, or when God protected continuously Nehemiah from his enemies. But those are verifiable supernatural explanations. But there's also the natural. And we've discussed many things in this series. This is the 8th message in this series, and we're still not done. So some of you that are waiting to the end, I got you another couple weeks. We've discussed these universal things in every one of these messages, but we've always discussed this one universal thing, and that was leadership. Because I think that every single person in this auditorium is the leader of someone, even if it's just leading yourself. And there's a book that was written by Daniel Goldman, and it was called Emotional Intelligence. And he asks in this book, why is it that most people in life fail to reach their full potential? Why is it that most people fail to reach their full potential? And his answer that he gave was, self-leadership is exhibited by leaders when they persevere in leadership despite overwhelming opposition or discouragement. When they manage to hold their ego at bay, and when they stay focused on their mission rather than being distracted by other people's agendas, they refuse to give up during times of crisis. And yes, Nehemiah enjoyed these things that we see as supernatural favor in his life, but he also practiced the principles of self-leadership, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Nehemiah, and we're going to turn to Nehemiah chapter 6 as we ask this very real question, is fear a factor for us? And on our journey through this series, we've talked about these various oppositions that Nehemiah faced, and we've talked about negative people, and we've talked about negative feelings like discouragement. We've talked last week about negative circumstances like a lack of money. But none of these things that we've discussed have been sufficient to stop Nehemiah and what he was trying to do. And here at this point in chapter 6, the wall is just about completed. Everything is done except for the hanging of these gates. But now Nehemiah's enemies actually start to get frantic. Nehemiah's enemies are watching what's happening and realizing that they haven't been able to stop it, and now they're getting worried. And so they see this wall that's about to be dedicated, and they think, we have got to do something to derail this guy and this group of people. And so they launch this another round of attacks. But even though these attacks were much more subtle, they are also much, much more intense because they're directed at Nehemiah himself. And what I want you to notice in these attacks that we're going to read through is that these attacks grow in intensity. And each of these attacks is based on the very basic emotion of fear. And so we look at the first attack. His enemies threatened him with isolation. And we see that play out in Nehemiah chapter 6, 1 and 2, verses 1 and 2. And it says, "Now when it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, and to the rest of our enemies, that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach remained in it, although at that time I had not set up the doors in the gates, then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, 'Come, let us meet at Cherphim in the plain of Ono.' But they were only planning to harm me." And so this wall was just about complete, and his enemies are saying, okay, you win. But before you finish this wall, why don't you come down and meet us halfway, and let's talk about our differences. But Nehemiah says, oh no, hold on a minute. I don't think so. I see the strategy here. And we have to ask, why was Nehemiah unwilling to meet and dialogue with his enemies? Because shouldn't we have the attitude to sit down with our enemies and discuss our differences? Isn't that what we're taught? Always just be willing to sit down at the table and work things out. Has anyone not heard that? No? It's kind of quiet in here. Amen. Adding a little. But why was he unwilling to have this dialogue? And I'm going to tell you that compromise is good. Compromise is good, unless it involves compromising your convictions. God never calls us to compromise our convictions, and yet there are people who will say to us, and some good, well-meaning Christians will say to us, go ahead and give in a little bit. Compromise. Just a little. And what the enemies are saying to Nehemiah is, come talk to us. And they're putting this fluffy spin like there's some sort of conversation that they can have that they haven't had. And he says no. And I want you to notice that what he says at the end of that verse 2 that we read, was, but they were planning to harm me. But they were planning to harm me. And Nehemiah actually saw through all of their motives. Nehemiah looked at the situation and was able to tell exactly what's going on. And I'm going to add that every leader, and I don't care who you are, every leader, if you are going to succeed, you need to have that sixth sense, that discernment that allows you to see the motives of those who would try to harm you. And maybe that harm is physical, maybe it's just trickery, but you need that sixth sense to see these things. But how do you get that spirit? And I'm going to tell you, to get that spirit, first, I believe that the Holy Spirit speaks to us. I believe that the Holy Spirit speaks to us and guides us and leads us. But some of your discernment also needs to come from experience. Nehemiah had been around the block. He wasn't new to these things. He was a slave for that period of time before all this. And more than once he's run into these things, and he could see right through the smoke screen. And so Nehemiah also learned through discipline. And we read in chapter 6, 3 and 4, "So I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to talk to you? They sent messages back to me 4 times in this manner, and I answered them in the same way." Nehemiah said, look, I have talked to you over and over and over and over about what we're trying to do and why, and you're still not satisfied. You're still sending these people with these attacks, and I'm not going to allow you to derail what God has called us to do. And what was Nehemiah being arrogant? No. Nehemiah was being focused. J.I. Packer said, he quoted once, "No amount of theory will help a would-be golfer who will not keep his eye on the ball, so no amount of wisdom will make one a leader if he cannot keep his priorities steadily in view." And so let me offer that same advice to our teens. We're talking about our youth. Let's talk straight to the teens and the young adults that are in the rooms. You have your lives in front of you. Plenty of time to make a bunch of mistakes. You have your lives in front of you, but remember this lesson that many times the good things are the enemy of the best things in life. If you expend all of your resources and time on the good things, the things that are just good, you won't have anything left to focus on the very best things which God has called you to do. And truly successful people in life have learned how to say no to the good things so that they could focus on the bad things, or focus on the best things, without feeling the need to apologize. One of the things that I was thinking about is I had a conversation with Scott just a couple days ago. And Scott was talking about, and his wife standing right there, Rhonda, Scott Mowry. And he said over the years, his priorities have absolutely changed. Scott is one of the friendliest, most helpful people this side of the Pecos. Scott will jump into any project, anybody needs help now. But Scott has learned. Scott has learned that his priorities of God, his priorities of his wife, can sometimes be compromised by those good things, the good spirit of being there for everybody. And he ends up sacrificing the best things in church, in his faith, in his wife. He sacrifices those best things just to be there and appease some of the good things. That can't be, folks. Does it mean that we say no to all the good things and we never stretch ourselves? Absolutely not. But the good things in life cannot take precedence over the best things, the most important things, the God things in your life. We need to learn to say no so that we might be able to focus a little better. And while Nehemiah's enemies tried this trick of isolation, and that didn't work, and so they launched the second attack, and that was intimidation. And we see that in chapters 5 through 7. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me in the same matter, in the 5th time, with an open letter in his hand, and in it was written, "It is reported among the nations, and Gashmu says that you and the Jews are planning to rebel. Therefore you are rebuilding the wall, and you are to be their king according to these reports. You have also appointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you, a king is in Judah. And now it will be reported to the king according to these reports. So come, let us take counsel together. I'm going to tell on you." Do you see what Sanballat is doing here? Sanballat said, we had better meet. You don't know this, but people are talking. And not just some people, everybody is talking. There are these people that are saying these things that they're going to take directly back to the king, that you are trying to exalt yourself over everyone. And they're going to do that unless you come talk to me. Because everyone's saying it. And isn't the very likelihood that the person talking about this rumor is actually the person who started the rumor? Isn't that normally the way it works? Sanballat sends this letter saying that there's this rumor going around, and it was actually Sanballat himself that is spreading this rumor. And how many of you have ever been the victim of a rumor? A few of you? How many of you have ever started a rumor? We have one honest person, Rudy, the young lady in the black, just happens to be your granddaughter. It's not a fixed system here, it's not. Nobody ever really truly admits to that part of it, but yet they still happen. But let me just say this something about rumors and why they're so powerful and intimidating to us. In Chuck Swindoll's book, it's called Hand Me Another Brick. He gives these 3 characteristics of a rumor. And the first is that rumors usually lack a source. Rumors usually lack a source. And you know, whenever you ask somebody who's spreading a rumor, now exactly who is it that said this? The usual response is, I don't feel comfortable telling you. I mean, I would, but I don't really feel comfortable. Isn't anybody else? Am I the only one? No? I think there's a bunch of people really doing the math. Did I start that rumor? In Ecclesiastes 7:21, it says, do not take seriously all words spoken against you. Do not take seriously all words spoken against you. And that is particularly true of words that are spoken against you that don't even have a source. Don't take them seriously. And one of the pastor mentor friends of mine, he was telling me off the bat, and he's giving me kind of like the checklist. You got to be careful here, 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 and here. And I don't think I caught the whole program because I still mess up. But he was telling me about this letter that he got. And it was 5 pages. I think it was front and back. 5 pages. 5 pages of this letter that was filled with the most vehement, critical, caustic, hateful comments that you can imagine. And he said many years later, to this day, he can remember that letter almost word for word. And it was anonymous. He sat there and read this thing over and over and over again. And this intimidation, this feeling that he's messed up and missing the boat consumed him for a great while, to the point where he can't get it out of his head. And he said that to this day, he has never read an anonymous letter ever again. He said that when he picks up these letters, and if someone leaves a letter on his desk, that he'll look at it first. See, does it have a return address? And if it doesn't, he'll still open it, but he turns immediately to the back page and see if there's a signature. And if there is no signature, or it's signed from a caring congregation person, he wads it up and throws it in the trash. Because he cannot take the risk. He does not have the luxury of having these ill-intended thoughts and descriptions and pictures and accusation put into his mind. Especially if someone doesn't even sign it. And there's a lot of times I myself have learned I have to be kind of quiet and to myself before church. And some people think I'm like ignoring them, I'm not talking to them. And some people don't care, they just come and find me. You know who you are. But I've learned in just this short amount of time that I need to be very careful, because there's a lot of things going on. And I've had more than one morning where I come in and I hear less than positive things. And so on this day where I'm trying to prepare my heart to not just read what I've prepared through the week, but to hear what God is speaking to me in the moment, I do not have the luxury of letting this poison come in and affect me. Make me worry about things. Make me worry about this very day. I refuse to be there. I do not have that luxury, but I'm going to plead to you and say, neither do you. Do not let these thoughts consume you. Do not listen to these things and let them overwhelm you or change you. Don't pay attention to the rumors, especially when they don't have a source. And the second that he described in that book was rumors lack accuracy. People who spread rumors love to exaggerate, and they'll say things just like Sanballat said, that the whole world is saying this stuff about you, Nehemiah. The whole world is saying that you are planning this rebellion, that you are promoting yourself as a king. And Nehemiah is saying, really? Really, Sanballat? Everybody's saying it? Everybody's worried about this little unknown governor in this obscure place in the Middle East. Everybody's worried about this. Really? And it reminds me of school. It reminds me of school and young people. Here's those parts for you. When somebody comes to you at school and says, everyone's talking about this thing, everybody's talking about it, it's probably not true. And if you could find that person, what we'll call rumor bearer, and you could slip them a truth pill, it's probably illegal. Don't try it. If you could do that and you could corner them and you could ask the question, so if your school has 500 people, so everybody's saying this, so you've talked to 500 people. If they were truthful, they say no. And you say, well, then you've talked to 250 people, and they say no. Well, 100 people? 50, 25 people? No. And at the end of the conversation, you'd probably deduce that you got about 10 to 15. And so my question for you young people, and there's all kinds of conversations about bullying and cyberbullying and all of these things, and so much of it is just ridiculous, and that is one of the downsides of the social media, is people can reach you no matter where you are. But the truth is, not everybody is saying those things about you. Not everybody feels those things about you. Not everybody believes those things about you. And should you lose any sleep for just a few people unnecessarily saying those things about you? It's easy to tell young people, don't let this affect you. But if we, adults, are honest, we don't do so good at it. It's easy to say, oh, don't let it affect you, but are we so tough? Do we let it affect us? Why are we talking about this in the first place? It all sounds like good and sound advice, but we're just as guilty, not just in spreading the rumors, even though we didn't get very many hands, but also in listening to that filth and garbage. Rumors usually deal with not only a lack of attribution and a lack of accuracy, but they also lack a proper setting. And you see that in verse 5, that Sanballat sent this open and unsealed letter. Nothing in Scripture is there for no reason. Letters like that from governor to governor are supposed to be sealed. He sends this open and unsealed letter. And Sanballat, like I said, is a governor, and he sends it in this manner so that no matter who, everybody who's in the process of handing this letter through the chain is able to open it and read it and further help spread these rumors. If he was really trying to help Nehemiah, if he really wanted to help Nehemiah, he wouldn't have done it in that way. But that was Sanballat's goal. He was trying to destroy Nehemiah. And how did Nehemiah respond? How did Nehemiah respond to this thing that he did? And we see that beginning in verse 8. First of all, he denied the lie. In verse 8 it says, "Then I sent a message to him saying, such things as you are saying have not been done. But you are inventing them in your own mind, for all of them were trying to frighten us." thinking they will become discouraged, and then the work, it will not be done. And Nehemiah said, what you are doing is a lie. And sometimes we can all get kind of overly pious, and when these things come and the rumors spread, we say, I'm not going to lower myself to even respond to such a thing. Has anyone done that? It really doesn't work out that well. Sometimes you have to go that route. But does anyone remember the name Michael Dukakis? Please show me I'm not the only one. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. Michael Dukakis, no matter whether you like the guy, you didn't like the guy, Michael Dukakis, for you young people, he ran against George H. Bush Sr. for the presidency of the United States. And he lost. But years after that, he was interviewed and he was asked what he felt led to that loss. And Michael Dukakis said that he had made the mistake of not responding to the lies about him and his record. He thought that the truth would overcome the lies without him having to defend himself. It didn't work out so good. Sometimes we do need to confront a lie with the truth. There are times where you're not going to. There are times where it's not appropriate. Just as we look at the settings and some of these things, we have to discern those things. And we have to err on the side of love. But sometimes these lies do need to be confronted with the truth. And that's what Nehemiah did. And not only that, but secondly, he more importantly depended on the Lord. And in verse 9, it says, for all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking that they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. But, O God, strengthen my hands. Nehemiah knew that he was the subject of this intimidation. And so he confronted the lie with the truth. But ultimately, God took care of this. Ultimately, he said to God, I need your help in this. You're going to have to take care of this so that I can take care of the work that you have me here to do. And I need to get back to work and finish this wall. That is exactly how Nehemiah handled the lies that were being spread about him. And then, did his enemies just fold up their hands and say, oh, we just can't win. We might as well go home. No. And you'll notice the third and final attack, and it was the most severe in nature, and that was the attack of elimination. They said if we can't isolate this guy, if we can't intimidate this guy, then we're going to kill this guy. We're going to eliminate and at the very least discredit this guy. And you see that play out starting in verse 10. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, and son of Mehetabel, can't they say John, Larry? Seriously. They make it rough up here. That's the hardest part. Who was confined at home, he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you, and they are coming to kill you at night. And now, who was Shemaiah? You need to know these things, because he was this self-proclaimed prophet of God. And Shemaiah comes to Nehemiah and says, Nehemiah, God has given me a revelation about you. God has told me, even though he apparently didn't tell you, you weren't in the loop. And here's what the revelation was. Your enemies are going to kill you at night. Therefore, you had better follow me into this holy place so that we may hide. And Nehemiah had good reason to be skeptical. And you'll notice this in verse 11, what he says. But I said, should a man like me flee? Should a man like me flee? In other words, it doesn't make sense. God would not call me to do this work. God would not call all of these people to come and do this work on rebuilding this wall and then tell me to run away with my tail between my legs, to run away from my responsibility. And then he goes on to say, and could one such as I go into the temple to save my life? What's happening here is you need to understand, and we see it actually in Numbers 18:7. It actually talks about how only priests were allowed to enter this place, or you could die. Only priests were allowed to enter this temple. That was the rule. That was God's rule. And yet Shemaiah was saying, let's you and me just, we're just going to go hide over here. Don't worry about that. I'm here to help. And Nehemiah says, no, that violates the very word of God, and I will not go along with this. You want to know one way, just one way to know if someone's revelation about you is true or not? Does it measure up according to the will of God? Does it correspond what God has already said in His Word, both in His book, but also in your heart? Does it measure up? And you look at verses 12 and 13. Then I perceived that surely God had not sent him, but he uttered his prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired for this reason, that I might become frightened and act accordingly and sin, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could reproach me. If they couldn't kill me, they could at least say, look what he did. Look what he did. He went into the holy place. He's not supposed to. Nehemiah understood that this wasn't a prophet of God. This was a hired gun. Nehemiah understood that they were just trying to frighten him. And if he had fallen for this trickery, he would have been violating the very word of God. And at the very least, his ministry would have been discredited altogether. God never, ever, ever uses the fear of man to motivate us. Never. There are many things that I fall short on, many things that I question in myself. We all do that. I suppose that's pretty normal. Yesterday at the men's breakfast, it was a little bit after George with the heart surgery on Tuesday. After he was sharing, Rudy came up, Dad came up, and put his arms around me. And he won't look at me right now. He put his arms around me. He said, I think this is why God has you in this space at this time. He said, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. But he was talking about my life leading up to this. He was talking about how, and I've been very open and honest and upfront, that I grew up less than stellar. I grew up with an overly physically abusive father who would do torture things, my stepfather, to be precise. That I lived on the streets of Chicago. And he said that prepared me. He said that prepared me because this stuff is scary. And it sends a lot of good men and women running for the hills. And he said that is not going to be the case here. And I don't know if it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but I was brought up with the idea that if you're coming on, then come on. I'm not backing up or stepping backwards in any way when it comes to glorifying God. I will never hesitate or apologize for doing what's right because it's right. I won't do it perfect. But I will put God's calling, God's conviction, God's people above everything else, even when it affects me adversely, even if I have to sacrifice all. 2 Timothy, you're welcome. I love you. 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7 says, For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of love and power and discipline. The reason that God blessed Nehemiah is he refused to allow fear to cause him to abandon his responsibilities. He refused to let fear cause him to abandon his very obedience to God. And what was the result of this steadfast spirit? Look at verses 15 and 16. So the wall was completed on the 25th of the month of Elul in 52 days. This thing had been laying in rubble for 100+ years, and they completed it in 52 days when everyone said it couldn't be done. When all of our enemies heard of it and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. And it would be nice if we could just put a period here. The end. They lived happily ever after. But it doesn't work out that way, and we still have a couple more weeks to go. The enemy stopped for a little while, but we're going to see that it picks up. We're going to see that they regroup and once again try to come against Nehemiah. But Nehemiah refuses to stop. He was successful because he refused to let fear be a factor for him. And anytime you allow fear to cause you to run, anytime you allow fear to cause you from your school, from your marriage, from your family, from your work, from your ministry, from your calling in life, you are making a heavy and weighty mistake. And in Proverbs 29:25, it says, "The fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted." And God has surely blessed me. God has surely blessed our church, but you nor I have any reason to fear man while we walk in the saturating light and love of our most high God. Let us bow together.